Well, it's been called the most calamitous decision in the history of business, and that was the decision of New Coke when they decided to take the Coca-Cola formula and change it to make it taste more like Pepsi. But the executives who made that decision can rest easy now at long last, because these many years later, somebody has finally surpassed them in terms of the worst business decision ever. Hi, everybody. I'm Bill Whittle here with Steve Green and Scott Ott, and today's Right Angle is brought to you by our paying members and also by our pals over at the Patriot Post, who provide some very excellent written commentary, and we're happy to be associated with them, so check out the link for that below. Guys, it's one thing to screw up Coca-Cola and recover, because you could recover. It took them a couple years, then we'll call it Classic Coke, and then we'll slowly remove the classic. But the most indestructible franchise in American history was that little story called Star Wars. And while the next three movies after the first three movies were bad movies, they didn't destroy Star Wars, but these last three movies have. I'm doing this story today because the full trailer for the upcoming final part of the final trilogy, Rise of Skywalker, released earlier, and nobody cares. Everybody is looking at it and they're panning it, and Disney is in a full-on panic. Steve, there are fairly compelling evidence that not only have they shot and edited 6 different versions of this film in order to see which one tests better, that they are still, or at least within the last several days or week or so, still out there doing reshoots on a movie that opens in 2 months. JJ Abrams, who was called in to direct the final one after the catastrophe that Rian Johnson made out of film number 8, has said, well, this film may not appeal to everybody, which means it's not going to appeal to anybody. And it is the ultimate example of get woke, go broke. You took Disney paid $4.1 billion for this franchise from George Lucas. Yep. They built Star Wars Galaxy Edge at both Disneyland and Disney World, and nobody's going. And nobody's going because they destroyed Star Wars, and they destroyed Star Wars because they made Star Wars into something it never was before, and that is tedious, lecturing, hectoring, social justice warriorism shoved down your throat whether you like it or not. And there's no going back. They can't save it.
You know, I watched the trailer for the first time just half an hour or so before we shot this segment, and it reminds me of a high school senior practically calling girls from the buzz book at random the night before prom trying to get a date. It reeks of desperation.
Bring me everything you got.
It's like, forget about that last movie. You like Star Destroyers? We got more Star Destroyers than you ever saw before. We got Lando back. We got the Emperor. You're gonna love this. Please come buy a ticket. It's a really sad, pathetic display. And the thing is, I want to talk about JJ Abrams for a moment. This is a guy. He's the Palestinians of big budget action movie. I don't know if you're familiar with the. I think it was a Kissinger quote. He said the Palestinians never miss an opportunity to miss an opportunity. He's talking about the peace process over there in the Middle East. And I say this because I really enjoyed the Star Trek reboot. I thought it brought back the characters in a way that you didn't have. They wouldn't have to be slaves to the established canon in the old TV series and the movies. They could have this fresh start and just have a whole stream of great movies in front of them. And if Star Trek misfired on some cylinders, well, let me tell you about one of them. This is what I'm talking about. JJ Abrams never missing an opportunity to miss an opportunity. In that film, Spock has to save his parents as Vulcan collapses because the bad guys put a black hole in the center of the planet, right? Totally out there, great Star Trek stuff. Well, for absolutely no reason, Spock's mom, his human mom, is in the Vulcan holiest of holies, even though the whole Vulcan leadership hates her for being a mere human. And she's just there as a plot device so that Spock can try and fail to save his mom while he does save his dad. And so he's got some tragedy. What would have made that scene work is if his mom was at home or at her job or whatever it is she does at Vulcan, and Spock is given a choice. He can either save his dad and the Vulcan archives and save his race and remain Vulcan, but at the cost of his human side. He would have to choose his Vulcanness, and it would be a tragic choice that would have given Spock depth that Leonard Nimoy didn't even give him. And Leonard Nimoy created that character. It would have been a fabulous way to retool Spock. And instead it's, I tried to save them both and I failed, and now I really miss my mom. It was just a total misfire. And Bill, you mentioned a similar misfire in The Force Awakens, the first of the new Star Wars movie, where when Han dies and Leia feels it through the Force while she's trying to command the battle, instead of having to sit down and for the first time in her career as a politician and a general have to sit it out crying.
Yeah,
yes.
or just cry in front of everybody. Yeah,
exactly. Instead, she just shrugs it off and goes back to commanding the battle. Well, what are we as the audience supposed to feel if Leia just shrugs off the death of Han Solo, not just her husband, but the guy I wanted to be from the time I was 8 years old? So
yeah, she took it like she'd been declined for a credit card application.
Yeah, and that is on JJ Abrams for the writing and the direction of all of that stuff. He can do the snappy dialogue, he can do an action sequence, but when it comes to actual depth, he just can't do it. And we go back to Star Wars because even though it's a popcorn movie with laser swords, it actually has a little bit of depth to it. But I'll tell you why I don't think the franchise is dead, or at least I hope it isn't dead. I think it's dead in the movie theaters, absolutely. The social justice warriors at Disney have just killed it. On the other hand, you look at the trailers for The Mandalorian coming on the Disney streaming service starting next month, and Jon Favreau, who is the guy who brought
can tell
us
a story.
Yeah,
Iron Man. Yeah,
he brought us Robert Downey Jr. as Tony Stark. It was just absolute genius. He is running that show, and The Mandalorian looks great. If Star Wars has a future, it might be on TV, but at the movie flex, it's dead, Jim.
Scott, the reason I think the story is so important is because of all of the factors that are involved with the destruction of something that bulletproof, because that's what it was. It was bulletproof. People would buy toys and they would go to see anything. It took a major, major effort over a long period of time to destroy that franchise. And aside from the fact that they forced their feminism into it and their socialism into it and all the rest of it, the one thing that they did consistently, especially on these last three movies, Lucas did it too on the middle trilogy, which was not outstanding in any way. But the one thing that the filmmakers did was they were determined to not bow to what the fans wanted. The more the audience told them what they wanted, the more determined they were to make sure they gave them the exact opposite. It's this kind of elitist sort of snobbery, you know? It's like, well, you know, those beer swilling people out there, they don't know what's good for them. I'm going to give them a story about social change, and that'll do. And the fans kept saying, we don't like this. And they kept saying, we don't like it by voting with their dollars. And they just kept on doing it. They just couldn't accept the fact that common people had a voice in this and that they should be listened to. I just saw Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, and I enjoyed that movie so much. And I just realized the reason I love that movie so much is because Quentin Tarantino is the only director in Hollywood today who has the guts to give an audience what they want.
That's a fascinating thing. I was just thinking when you were saying that I went to see, Stephanie and I went to see REO Speedwagon in concert and last year. And we also, or maybe it was earlier this year, and we also saw Chicago in concert, okay? Both of them at the same arena. Chicago came out and did a bunch of songs that I've never heard that I'm sure that they played with proficiency. And REO Speedwagon came out thundering through High Infidelity. I mean, they just gave us the album that made that band what it is today.
And, imagine.
And Kevin Cronin got up there and he said, you know, we played here years ago. I forget how many decades ago, 30, 40 years ago. We warmed up for ZZ Top. And I told the guys after we got done doing the one song that anybody knew and milking that for 20 minutes, when we got off the stage, I said to the band, someday, boys, we're going to come back here and we're going to play songs like ZZ Top did, and everybody in the audience will sing every word of every song we do. And
yes, that's what nostalgia
happened.
is.
And,
yes.
and they were great. And it's not just because they did old stuff. They threw in some new stuff, but we knew their old stuff and they made that associative bond between us. Star Wars, I'm not a Star Wars geek or a Star Trek geek like you guys are, but I think that writers somewhere along the line went from the idea of there is a story inside of me personally that has to come out. I need to put this kind of emotional story about what it means to be a man down on paper, or a woman for that matter. And they've gone to saying, there's a statement I want to make. I have a point I want to make. And
this is what you will learn.
And instead of being revelatory about the human condition, they wind up just being, it's merely political punditry. And we're awash in that, as we can see here on this show. The great thing that I remember from the 1970s about Luke Skywalker was that he was an immature pissant. And he was the whole time in that movie, as he faced challenge after challenge and failed repeatedly, you kept thinking, this guy is never going to get it. He is never going to be successful. And then when he gets to that climactic scene where he's got to fly down this tunnel with all these guns shooting at him and put this, shot in this tiny little hole. And the whole time there was actual jeopardy because you knew that he was immature and you knew that he was prone to making bad decisions. And you knew that despite the fact that he had the Force with him, more often than not, he may decide to turn away from that and get stung. The reason why it worked is because you knew who he really was. And when you're a viewer in a movie like that, you say, you know what? I'm kind of like that guy too.
Yeah, that's
I'm weak.
Precisely right.
I'm flawed, but I can make the shot. You give me a chance and I will do something great. And you walk out of there feeling 10 feet tall.
I wouldn't take this story and I wouldn't come back to this topic so often, just the pop culture topic, if I didn't think it was so fundamentally important politically. Several of the things that we can learn about the Star Wars thing, and the final one is the most important. First of all, we can learn that modern feminists cannot make films. They can't, because they can't make them about men. And if they make them about women, their insecurity of the filmmakers is so high that you can't possibly show a woman losing. You can't show her have a setback. She can't lose to a man. And so what you get in this final Star Wars trilogy is Rey, who never been inside the Millennium Falcon, never flown a ship before in her life, flies better than Han Solo ever could, never picked up a lightsaber in her life, defeats the ultimate villain, not in the third act of the third movie, but in the first act of the first movie. And nothing ever happens to her. She never loses. She never has a setback. She's a powerful woman. And nobody cares. Nobody cares at all. No one cares about any of these characters because of the politics involved, where the women involved, Kathleen Kennedy, the producer of the Star Wars series, would famously come out with a shirt that says the Force is female. And so we're going to have a female character, a bunch of them, and none of them will ever be wrong, and none of them will ever make mistakes, and none of them will ever have setbacks, and none of them will ever be defeated, and they'll have all the powers that could possibly be, and more of those too. And they got nothing but powers, and so they are the most boring, pointless, inhuman, waste of time characters that I've ever seen. And when you say something like this, the elitists at the studios will say, you're a misogynist. You hate women. You can't handle powerful women. So when the fans criticize the story, the thing to do for the studio is to tell the fans that they're sexist, racist, misogynist, or whatever the case may be. Nobody had a problem with Ripley. Nobody had a problem with any of these actually good female characters. But just to wrap this up, it is critically important, because what's happened here is a cultural change that I personally feel is about as significant as the campaign to get America to stop smoking, which had a miraculous effect. You look at 30, 40 years ago, 50 years ago, everybody was smoking all the time. Nobody smokes anywhere now. This is that kind of a seismic shift. They have taken a movie that is not a movie. It's a religion. And it's a religion because of all the things that Star Wars represented. First of all, there's an order. There's a code. There are good guys and there are bad guys. There's the arc of the hero. You can start out, as Scott pointed out, as a farm boy, and you can end up as the most powerful warrior in the galaxy, but you're going to have to drop a lot of rocks and you're going to have to fall down a lot of times. You're going to have your hand cut off. It's going to cost you. All of these things made the first Star Wars work. But progressivism doesn't have any fun. You're not allowed to have fun. There is no such thing as just fun, because if you're having fun, that's an opportunity that's missed for you to get the bigger message that you need to learn. The most important thing about this is, very simply, and I bet my entire life on this, what used to be a generation of left-leaning apolitical voters who would go out and vote Democrat simply because that's all they were ever told to do, talking about the millennial generation, has watched this ram this down your throat attempt to teach them what they need to know, follow them out of their schools and into video games and into their movies and into Star Wars. And they are furious and they've given up. It's gone. Nobody cares anymore. And that means they're angry, and they're angry at the people who are telling them, you need to learn your lesson about capitalism. You need to learn your lesson about guns. You need to learn your lesson about this. They're furious. They want nothing to do with them. This film hasn't made this generation conservatives, but it certainly has cured them of being liberals. There's no question about that. And that is an enormous, enormous opportunity. And it can't be changed. And the reason it can't be changed, folks, is because even though the Hollywood behind my back here is the most left-leaning organization in the United States, entertainment is conservative. It's conservative by nature. No one makes a film about a committee. No one ever makes a film about a committee. If you're going to do a film about a football team, you concentrate on 2 or 3 characters. I can sum it up in an expression I like very much to say that entertainment is conservative because no one has ever paid to see a movie where James Bond confronts the evil supervillain armed with a strongly worded letter from the United Nations and then drive off in a Prius at a reasonable speed. That does not happen, ever. And the more they try to force those values, not just onto Star Wars or Star Trek or any of the other things that they tried to ruin, the more they try to force those things onto the entire idea of entertainment, individualism, heroism, toxic masculinity, like getting in a jet fighter and going down and trying to shoot down this invading army. Anytime they try to screw with that, people begin to realize what these people are. And what they are ultimately, in the end, is a group of busybodies who do not know how to have fun and who fear having fun in a very, very big way. So Star Wars is dead. Long live Star Wars. The answer is to do what they did with Star Trek, and that is to have the fans make their own movies. Star Trek Discovery is abhorrent, but Star Trek Anaxar is a fan-made film that is the best Star Trek I've seen in 50 years. So we're going to go out and do it on our own. It belongs to us now, and let the studios sue every single one of us. Times are changing, and they're changing in our favor, and it's the most optimistic thing I see on the entire political scene. That'll do it for this edition of Right Angle, brought to you by the paying members at BillWhittle.com and by our buddies over at the Patriot Post. We'd love to have you go over and visit their stuff. Their writing, their memes, especially on social commentary, is just absolutely fantastic. So for Steve Green and Scott Ott, I'm Bill Whittle. We'll see you next time on Right Angle.